and welcome to the Wellness Wednesday webinar series brought to you by the Family and Community Health Sciences Department of Rutgers Cooperative Extension. Before we get started with the presentation on seafood and healthy living, part 1, we'd like to ask you a few questions about your demographics. These questions are used to report to the USDA to ensure that we are reaching a diverse population. Also, at the end of the presentation, you'll be asked a few questions about what you thought of the webinar. Please make sure to hit finish and exit when you are complete. Thanks so much for your participation.
Okay, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our presenters, Joanne Kinsey and Christine Zellers. Joanne is a family and community health sciences educator and associate professor at Rutgers Cooperative Extension in both Atlantic and Ocean counties, funded through the New Jersey Agriculture Experiment Station. Ms. Kinsey has a master's degree from Drexel University, and she is certified as a worksite wellness specialist and is also a registered yoga teacher. Joanne's specialization areas are nutrition, worksite wellness, healthy lifestyle, human development, laughter therapy, and technology and education. She has also developed the Healthy on the Job Workplace Wellness Program, which provides evidence-based information to employees and their employers. Joanne also enjoys making simple online recipes for our consumers. Ms. Christine Zellers is also from Family and Community Health Sciences, as she is an educator in Cape May County, where she educates the community on wellness, nutrition, and fitness. She has an extensive experience collaborating with partners to create healthy food environments in areas of policy, systems, and environmental change. In addition to the community health policies, Ms. Zellers works to educate residents on topics to improve their overall health and prevent chronic disease with a holistic approach to a well-lived quality lifestyle that includes physical activity, a nutrient-dense diet, and quality of sleep. Today, Joanne and Chris will discuss with you how seafood can support a healthy lifestyle while providing tips on purchasing, storage, and preparation. So without further ado, I will hand things off to the both of you.
Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. This is actually a two-part series, so we hope you'll join us next week for the second part of Seafood and Healthy Living, which will feature Rachel, that was just on Tansy, and Lauren Erickson. But before we get started, oh, sorry, I think I'm one too ahead. Before we get started with the presentation, I just wanted to quickly review the cooperative extension structure for those of you who aren't familiar with it. Rutgers Cooperative Extension is a partnership between the Board of County Commissioners, Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, and the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And we have faculty or staff in 20 of the 21 New Jersey counties. I think that's actually 21 of 21 now, as I was just on with a new person from Hunterdon County, I believe. So now I think we're in 20 of 21. We're composed of 3 departments, including Agriculture and Natural Resources, 4-H Youth Development, and Family and Community Health Sciences, or FCHS. FCHS provides outreach in New Jersey and beyond on topics related to nutrition, chronic disease prevention, food safety, and overall wellness. We hope that you will visit our website for nutrition and wellness related resources and follow us on social media. As I said, this is part 1 of 2 parts. And during this part, we're going to be talking about the dietary guidelines, purchasing, and preparing. Rachel, if you want to go ahead and release the poll, you could do that. If you would all be so kind as to answer the poll that Rachel's about to release. It just is going to give us a little bit of background information. So as we develop information and educational materials on seafood, we know a little bit about you and we know how to target our discussions for the future. Today, like I said, is part 1, and our objectives for this excuse me, our objectives for this presentation is going to be understanding the need to eat seafood with the dietary guidelines for Americans as the basis for that, and understanding the dietary guidelines. It's also going to be about purchasing and safekeeping of seafood, which is important, right? We want to get you to eat more, but we also want you to be able to purchase it safely and keep it safely. And then finally, Joanne is going to be talking a little bit about ways to prepare seafood, some recipe ideas. And she has some really great ones, and there's also some videos that she'll present that will be available to you after the presentation is complete. So as nutrition educators, we realize that many Americans fall short of the recommendations on seafood consumption. A good starting point for this discussion is explaining the dietary guidelines for Americans. You may have heard reference to the dietary guidelines for Americans, maybe on TV or in a commercial or from a health professional or during a talk from a nutrition educator such as myself, Rachel, or Joanne. Every 5 years, the new dietary guideline is published by professionals from across the country. And these professionals get together and they determine the best measures to educate the public on staying healthy with good nutrition. So there's a lot of contributors that go in that put information forth. These guidelines are updated regularly and they really reflect what our needs are. So if they find that we're lacking in some areas or we have too much of some things, like maybe too much sugary beverages, then the dietary guidelines reflect recommendations to make us all healthy. As you can see from the definition, the dietary guidelines is a critical tool for professionals to help Americans make healthy choices in their daily lives to help prevent chronic disease and enjoy a healthy diet. It serves as an evidence-based foundation for nutrition education materials that are developed by the federal government for the public. The dietary guidelines focus, as I said, on Americans' needs. They focus on preventing chronic disease and assisting with a healthy living pattern. There are specific recommendations about seafood that we're going to talk about a little bit later in the presentation, but it's important to remember that the recommendations made by the dietary guidelines for Americans are done based on our health needs. So if they're suggesting you eat more of something or less of something, it's really because we need it in our diet and we're falling short in those areas of getting those different things. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, which is part one, we're going to be covering the dietary guidelines and preparation and purchasing. But next week, in week 2, Rachel and Lauren are going to be giving you specific details on nutrition of fish. So I'm not going to dive really heavily into that. And they'll also give you some information about mercury and different recommendations on that. So I hope you'll tune in next week to view their webinar as well. So I'm just going to touch on that lightly. I'm not going to cover that because that's their slideshow. Eating seafood twice or even 3 times a week is one way that Americans could meet the dietary guidelines for Americans' recommendations. Seafood is a nutrient-dense, high protein food that has relatively low levels of total fat, saturated fat, sodium, and calories as compared to other foods. So it makes it a good choice. For these reasons, current guidelines suggest that Americans should increase their seafood consumption by replacing some other meats and poultries with seafood. So think about maybe taking out, say, sausage or something like that once a week if you're having that, or some red meat or poultry, and replacing that with seafood instead. They want you to have a total intake of 8 or more ounces per week. So in other words, seafood consumption should be about 20% of the total recommended intake of protein. Just like vegetables and fruit, a variety of seafood is also recommended, meaning don't just eat salmon. I know everybody goes for the salmon because of the good recommendations with the omega-3s, but try to have a variety. So think about not just eating salmon, but eat other fish that's out there or seafood that's out there as well. There's various types of vitamins in the various types of fish, just like there's various types of vitamins in the various types of fruits and vegetables. The omega-3 fatty acids found in seafood can provide significant health benefits. And this is one of the many reasons the dietary guidelines recommends that we increase the amount we eat. Healthy preparation methods are essential for keeping seafood's nutritional benefits. So try to avoid cooking, like deep frying them or adding fat to them. Try to use more lean processes for cooking them so that they don't, you're not undoing the good by adding a lot of fat and different things and sodium. So try to cook it in a healthy manner, which Joanne's going to teach you how to do at the end of this presentation. Heart disease is also one of the leading causes of death in the United States, and numerous studies have associated diets that are low in fat, saturated fat, trans fat, and cholesterol with the reduction of coronary heart disease. So the current dietary guidelines concluded that there is moderate evidence that shows the consumption of 2 servings of seafood per week, so 4 ounces per serving, would provide about 250 milligrams of omega-3 fatty acid. and that's associated with the reduction of cardiac mortality from coronary heart disease or sudden death in persons with and without cardiovascular disease. So people that have cardiovascular disease can improve their cardiovascular health, and those without it can improve their health as well by consuming more fish with that 4 ounces. Seafood can help individuals maintain a healthy heart because it's one of the best dietary sources of omega-3s. However, 90% of Americans are not eating the recommended amount of seafood. So we're low on fruits and vegetables, but we're really, really low also on seafood recommendations. So seafood's a good way to improve your health, your heart health. It helps you to maintain a healthy weight because it's a nice lean protein, and you can get vitamins and nutrients to create a healthy lifestyle. So consider adding more seafood into your diet to try to make those recommendations each week. And here's a simple this is based off of the dietary guidelines, the slides that's up now. The recommendation for seafood consumptions are based on a need for food that's lower in fat and sodium that I said, but also nutrient dense. And when we say something's nutrient dense, it means that it's low in calories, but it has a really good, powerful pack for our punch. We're getting the good nutrients out of it and not a lot of other things that our body doesn't need. For adults, it's recommended that seafood be consumed 2 to 3 times per week, as I said, and that's a minimum. It doesn't have to just be 2 to 3 times a week. You can eat more than that if you like. And the total should be 8 ounces consumed per week. And that's based on a 2,000 calorie diet. So that may or may not mean, you might need more, you might need less, depending on, how many calories you're taking in a day. That's for the 2 ounce serving during the week. You want to try to have it be about the size of the palm of your hand. So usually in general, thinking about that 4 ounce serving, the 2 of them, it's usually about the size of the palm of your hand. That's not always accurate. I have small hands, but in generally speaking, if you're getting a serving, you can look at trying to use your hand for that. Also for children under 2, you want to consult your child's doctor or the Academy for Pediatrics. For children over 2 years of age, the recommendation is 1 ounce twice a week. And as children age, you want to slowly increase the amounts. There's not really a recommendation for how to make those increases, but they do recommend that by the time the children get to about age 11, they should be eating the same amount as adults. So that 4 ounces 2 to 3 times per week, just like the adults. This chart, I included it because I wanted to drive home how we're, at that 90%, we're really not getting what we're supposed to be getting. And it's a breakdown of seafood consumption in the US. And as you can see, we're really falling short of the recommended consumption. This is from the dietary guidelines in 2015, and there's been a slight increase, but we're still not getting what we need. The blue lines that you see on the chart are the recommended intakes, and the orange dots are the average consumption. So you can see from this chart that these numbers are broken down by age and gender. Both male and female gender groups, the highest intake in these areas seems to be the age bracket of 51 to 70 years old. However, and even though they're the highest group, we also can note that they're only consuming about 5 ounces per week. So they're still falling 3 ounces short. So that's telling us the group that's consuming the most is 51 to 70, but they're still not hitting the numbers that they need to hit. So just something to keep in mind. And little ways to add it in for optimal health. Try, one day maybe having something for lunch, have fish tacos for dinner, like sub out the ground beef and have fish tacos a week or something like that. But just try to gradually add it in, and you'll see those numbers coming up and getting the recommended weekly amounts that you need. So now that I've convinced you to eat more seafood every week, right? You're all going to go out and eat seafood all the time. It's important that you know how to purchase the seafood, right? Because if it's hard, if it's not something that you're usually used to, then you want to make sure you're making a good purchase. So when you purchase seafood, think about making sure that it's on a thick bed of ice. So when you go to the grocery store or you go to the fish store, the fish should be lying on a thick bed of ice so it stays cold. The eyes of the fish should be bulged and clear, and the gills should be bright red. When you press on the flesh of the skin, it should spring back up. And fillets shouldn't be dark or green around the edges, and they shouldn't be mushy or dry in the center, because these are signs that the fish is old. And we don't want to eat old fish. You want nice, fresh fish. For shellfish, the shellfish should be alive. So If you tap the clam, it should shut automatically. If it doesn't close, then don't eat it, throw it away because it's already dead. So it's not good for you to consume. Also, if the shellfish has a cracked or broken shell, you don't want to eat those either. And I know they're expensive and it's hard to throw them away, but you don't want to get sick either. So, be cautious with that. Crabs and lobster spoil really suddenly after death. So they don't have a lot of time after they're dead. And that's why they're kept alive until you're ready to eat them. So make sure when you're choosing a crab or a lobster that they're moving a little bit so that they have that movement and they're still good to eat. And also when purchasing frozen seafood, because a lot of times we can purchase it that way, make sure that the packaging isn't damaged and that there's no torn, opened, or it's not torn, it's not opened at all, and it's not crushed. You also want to check for frost or ice crystals inside the packaging, because this could mean that the fish was frozen, thawed and refrozen, and we don't want to eat it that way either. You want it to have been frozen fresh and kept frozen at the proper temperatures. And then finally, don't buy seafood that in the freezer case of the store that's above the frost line of the case, because that might mean that it's not stored at the proper temperature and it might not be the best for consumption. So make sure it's below the frost line there to keep it in good taste. All right, so once you get your seafood home that you purchased, you're still going to want to make sure that it's safe. So fresh seafood can be stored safely in the refrigerator for 2 days or frozen. If you're going to freeze it, make sure to wrap it tightly and put it into the freezer. In order to thaw the seafood, you can put it in the refrigerator overnight on a plate, but make sure to put it on one of the lower shelves. So as it thaws, it doesn't drip any juices on food that might not be cooked, like lettuce or something like that. So put it on a lower shelf where it's not going to drip all over everything. And you can also place it under cold water to defrost it. And then finally, you can defrost it in the microwave on the defrost setting. And you just want to do it until the fish is icy, but a little pliable. And then you're good to cook it. To cook the fish, make sure the interior temperature is at 145 degrees. The flesh or fish should be opaque and it should separate easily. And when you cook scallops, you should make sure that they're firm and opaque. And shrimp and lobster should be pearly opaque. For mussels, clams, and oysters, which are shellfish, they should be cooked until their shells open. And then finally, we want to talk about, if you're catching your own, storing it, and things like that in the summertime, because thank goodness, right? Summer's coming. What is there, 70 something days until Memorial Day, but who's counting, right? Summer's coming, so keep seafood safe. If you're catching it yourself or at picnics, you want to make sure it's safe. So try to keep it out of the sun. You don't want to leave seafood out for more than 2 hours. Never leave seafood out at a picnic for more than an hour if the temperature is over 90 degrees. If you're catching it yourself, make sure to put the fillets in an ice-packed cooler in the shade, and also in the shade when you're picnicking. You want to keep the fish in the shade. So now that we have heard all about eating more seafood and everybody's motivated to eat more seafood and go out and buy it, we are going to turn it over to Joanne Kinsey, and she's going to let us hear about bringing it home and cooking it up so we can all enjoy some great seafood. Take it away, Joanne.
Okay, thank you. So now we know so much about how to take care of our fresh seafood when we purchase it, and that's very important that you have that information. So now what do we do with it when we get it home and we're ready to cook it? Seafood tends to be very, very tender. It cooks for the most part very, very quickly. And if you overcook it, you won't like it so much because the texture will not be very good. So it needs a little extra care for when it's being cooked. So let's take a look at the various seafood cooking techniques here on the slide. And perhaps you've used all of these, or maybe you've tried one or two, but maybe curious about trying something a little different as we get into some really nice local seafood season coming up. So baking, obviously, in fact, all of these methods actually keep the fish very tender and in a healthy mode. So you won't see that frying is on this list for good reason, because when you do that, then you're adding much more fat to the fish. So let's concentrate on the healthy cooking methods. So for baking, you would be cooking a whole fish or maybe a fillet of a fish. and it could be breaded, and that would help to conserve some of the moisture in the fish and give it some flavor too. But follow a recipe that you know has been widely used, and look at safe cooking practices, because we want to make sure the fish is cooked enough, but not necessarily overcooked. One good way to cook fish is to broil it, and I think many people probably start here if they are new to cooking fish, because it cooks very quickly at a higher heat, and you really have to watch it because it will cook so quickly. You want to make sure you don't overdo it. Since it is a high heat, it tends to add a little bit of extra flavor to the fish when it's being broiled. It would be similar to if you were cooking fish on a grill, you would get that grill flavor, but when you broil, you get a little bit of a different, maybe caramelization sort of a taste, which is really very good. Steaming fish, people have been cooking fish this way for a very, very long time. All you need is about 2 inches of water in the bottom of a pan, and it's a very gentle way of cooking your fish. So it keeps the fish very much intact. It's not being moved or handled very much, and it really keeps the integrity of the fish flavor, which is really what you're after too. And don't forget the nutrients, we're keeping them intact as well. If you cook on the grill, you're probably going to find very quickly, if you maybe you've done this too, that you really need a grill pan that has smaller holes in it than the registrations on your grill. All you need to do is this one time, just try to put fish on the grill, and you may find that didn't work very well because it could fall through in between the grates. So a grill basket or a grill pan works very well for this, and grilling will tend to cook very quickly as well. And it also adds that really great kind of grilled flavor to your fish. Pan searing is, again, it's a hot and fast method. You basically, if you have skin on your fish, you want to score the skin first, and then you would be cooking it very quickly, just a couple minutes on each side, just to get that pan seared texture and flavor and cook the fish. Remember, fish cooks very quickly, so you don't want to set it in a pan or on your grill and walk away. You need to be paying attention to what you're doing. Smoking is another way of cooking fish, and you've probably had smoked fish before. It adds lots and lots of flavor, but it's a very slow cook. So probably I would suggest that if you have not cooked fish very much or not at all, that you start with some method that is a little bit easier to get going with, like broiling or steaming, baking, and save the smoking until you're pretty experienced at smoking foods. Microwaving is also appropriate for cooking fish. You need to make sure you're using a microwave safe dish and a lid, and that'll help the fish to steam, usually in its own liquid. And again, the cooking would happen very quickly when you're using the microwave. Okay, Chris, next slide. So, don't overcook your fish. You won't like it. You won't be very happy with it. So be very diligent when you're cooking it. Get everything ready for when you're going to cook the fish, and then just pay attention to what you're doing to make sure you get the best result, because a dried out fish product is not going to be very appealing to you or perhaps to your guests. If you are cooking fin fish, this would be cooked to an internal temperature of 145 degrees Fahrenheit, and you could use a meat thermometer for this and test it for about 15 seconds in the thickest part of the fish. So what I do is I'll put my meat thermometer in when I think it's there, into a thick part, and if it's not quite there yet, take the thermometer out, close the oven door, and give it just a couple more minutes, and then go in and test the temperature at another thick part of the fish. So just be ready for that to make it come out great. If you're cooking a whole fish or a fish steak or a fish fillet, the rule of thumb is that for every inch of thickness, you could cook it about 10 minutes. And again, this depends on the fish. You have to be really diligent about, how thick is this fish that I'm cooking? I'm thinking about something like flounder is very thin, tilapia is very thin. So you really need to pay attention to that. You can test cooked fish, for doneness by taking a fork and just kind of pulling into the flesh a little bit, and it should flake. It should sort of begin to fall apart, and they call it flake. It pretty much looks like it's getting flaky. And you could probably even let it stand for just a couple minutes to continue that cooking. But if it's flaking, then your fish is done and it's ready to eat. When you're cooking shrimp, lobster, scallops, what you want to look for is an opaque color, and the flesh of the fish should be firm. So, and if you've ever cooked these, you notice that they do change color. Like, for example, when you're cooking shrimp that are fresh or have been frozen, they're sort of almost a gray, whitish color. But when you cook them and you know they're done, they turn pink. And lobster changes its color, becomes a little bit more white and looking a little bit more dense, as scallops do too. They change their color to something a little bit more of a white and a thicker color. If you're cooking clams, oysters, mussels, shellfish like that, then the shell will open when it's cooked. So for example, one of the recipes we'll look at is for clams. And when you're cooking clams in some type of a sauce or a liquid, when you put them in, obviously the shells are closed, because if you have a shell that's already open, you're not going to use that one. That would not be a good practice. You only use the shells that are closed tightly. And in the cooking process, the shells will open. And usually that's the indication that the fish is done. If you have any shells that do not open, do not eat them, because there may be something wrong with that particular product. Okay, Chris. So we're going to focus on New Jersey fish, just a couple different kinds in our recipes here today. So you'll notice salmon is not from New Jersey waters, so we're not talking about that, but we are going to talk about what is locally found, locally fresh, that we can all enjoy because we live so close to the shore and good fish markets. So let's talk about New Jersey flounder, and you'll notice in that former picture that you have the Jersey Fresh symbol, and you may see that or you may not see that at your local market. You can look for it, and you can also ask your fishmonger about it too, if they are part of the Jersey Fresh movement. So let's see, Chris, let's go to the next one. Sorry about that. So we find lots of New Jersey flounder. Sometimes it's called summer flounder in our fish markets, especially in the summer, spring, fall, and you find it in the wintertime too, but maybe not quite as often. It's a wonderful source of protein because flounder is very tender. It basically has little to no fat at all in it, and you can cook it in a variety of ways, and it cooks very quickly too. It works well in all kinds of recipes. In this picture to the left, you'll see some flounder that I bought in the summer, New Jersey flounder, and I cooked it as whole pieces like that, which is like filleted, or I could have cut it into pieces and cooked it. There's so many ways to be able to do that. So let's move on to the next slide. This is a recipe I was kind of playing around with. I wanted to take that New Jersey flounder and kind of jazz it up a little bit, if you will, with some of the foods that I like that I think are also very nutrient dense, like tomatoes, like spinach, and see what we could come up with. So this is a very simple recipe, and it takes very little time to cook. You can find the full recipe online, and we'll give you that link in a little while. And I chose to serve this over jasmine rice because I like that rice, and it cooks very quickly. So it worked out very well. And when cooking the rice, I used homemade vegetable stock instead of water. And we can talk about that another time, but you can make your own vegetable stock from scraps that you keep from your veggies in your freezer. I added a can of tomatoes and some fresh spinach and an onion that was sliced up. And I like garlic, so I used lots of garlic in that. And you can change that. If that's too much garlic for you, you can add less. If you say, I want more garlic, then feel free to add more. a little bit of chopped olives and the fresh flounder, and then a little bit of seasoning. And I use my favorite seasoning. But basically, I started by sauteing the onions and the garlic very lightly for just a couple of minutes, and adding tomato to it. And when I got that to the point where the tomatoes were starting to be hot, and I could see there was some bubbling action going on, I just simply put the fish on top of it, the fresh fish that was lightly seasoned, and let that cook for just a couple of minutes. And honestly, in less than 10 minutes, I had the most delicious flaky flounder that was wonderful. And I added some spinach to that as well, actually, before I put the fish on. And you can see in that picture to the bottom right, I used a fork to test the fish to see if it was flaky. And it was. So give it a try. Look at some of your favorite recipes and think, how can I incorporate fish more into my diet? Okay, Chris. So how about scallops? Scallops are in abundance in New Jersey water areas and in fish markets. They are an excellent source of protein. They are very easy to prepare and they cook very quickly as well. And they work in a variety of recipes. So look for a little sign perhaps in your fish market that says Jersey Fresh or Dayboat scallops, which means they are coming in on a daily basis. So let's go to the next slide. This was a very easy recipe too, and then the scallops cook so quickly. I paired it with farro because I was looking for another source of protein, and farro has lots of protein. It is a grain and it looks a lot like barley, but it's a little bit bigger than barley. So I cooked the farro according to package directions, and I prepared some cut up grape tomato, celery, onion, red pepper, and cucumber, chives, parsley. I got all that ready on my cutting board because I know when I started cooking these scallops, they were going to cook very, very quickly in the broiler. I took the scallops, put them on. I actually did this in my toaster oven and put that on a little bit of foil, put the scallops there, drizzled it with olive oil, put my favorite seasoning on the top. And they literally took about 5 to 6 minutes on each side, and then they were done. And again, the texture and the color changes so very much. And I think you can see that in these pictures, that on the top row, the pictures of the scallops are raw, and they have sort of a milky looking color, but then when they get cooked, they turn a little bit more firm and white. Don't overcook them though. You won't be happy with the results. So give it a try. How about crab cakes? Well, crab cakes are really pretty easy to make. There's a variety of recipes that you can find. This recipe was created by Chris. And she took some crab meat and separated it with a fork, added a little bit of just a few simple ingredients that you probably have in your house, like some flour and egg, some Worcestershire sauce, mayonnaise, mustard, and parsley flakes. You can add some of your favorite seasoning in there too, if you like. And she took that and just pressed it into a cake, sort of like a burger shape. And in her pan, she melted some butter and she cooked the crab cakes in that pan over with the melted butter, and they cook very quickly. I just cooked crab cakes about 2 nights ago, and the recipe I was looking at, which was one of ours, was about 3 to 4 minutes per side of the crab cake. So again, give your full attention to what you're doing, and you can be very happy with what you're going to do with your crab cakes. They're great served with lots of veggies or atop a salad. Have some fun with that. And they are from New Jersey Crab. How about clams casino? This is another one of Chris's recipes. She started with little neck clams, and there is an important step here, and that is to clean the clams under running water to get rid of the sand and debris. And you can use a vegetable brush or a seafood brush to make sure you get all the debris and sand off of the scallop shells. Make sure they're cleaned, and then allow them to sit in cool water for about 30 to 45 minutes so that they purge themselves of the sand that they may have inside of the shell. So give them that time to do that while you're getting everything else ready for your recipe, because this will go very, very quickly from here. She put her clams in a baking pan and put them in the oven and under the broiler. And when they opened up, she knew they were ready and they were cooked. And she started to work on her melted butter. She probably had this already, her onion, peppers, and everything already sauteed to maybe tender crisp. And then she put some on top of each half of the clam and a little bit of cheddar cheese and thin strips of bacon, and then just broiled until the bacon was cooked. It's very quick, super tasty. This is a great appetizer. Could even be a part of your main meal. So thanks, Chris. Let's go to the next one. Clams and white sauce. This is a big favorite, right? Again, clean those clams really well under running water, perhaps a vegetable brush, and allow them to sit, the clams to sit in a clean bowl of water for 30 to 45 minutes so they purge themselves. So this recipe is really easy. All you need to do is take some olive oil, onion, garlic in your skillet and cook that for just a few minutes until it's tender, and then add some flour and some vegetable stock, and then you boil that for just 2 to 3 minutes to kind of boil out the flour, so to speak, and to create a sauce. Then you're ready to add these clams that are not cooked, and you're going to put that heat up a little bit because you need that temperature to be a little bit higher, and we're going to simmer those clams in the liquid until they open. And at the end, you can stir in some grated cheese, oh my goodness, and serve it over hot pasta. I have to say, this is one of my personal favorites. If a clam does not open after the cooking, then you need to remove that clam and discard it. Do not eat a clam that has not opened when all the rest are opened. Okay, another really good and simple recipe, and this is tuna steaks. We do get tuna fresh here in our markets in New Jersey. So you want to choose nice, fresh tuna steaks, and you can take whatever seasonings you like. In this case, Chris used garlic powder, salt, and pepper to kind of press into the steak so that the flavor would kind of work its way in there a little bit. And she put that on both sides. She used avocado oil in the pan and put the heat kind of high so she could sear the fish. Searing means you're going to cook it fast and hot on one side, and then you're going to turn it and cook it on the other side. And when it's seared on both sides, if it's a good quality tuna, it does not need to be cooked all the way through unless that is your preference. That's totally up to you. And then at the end, she took those tuna steaks when they were cooked and pushed them into a little pan or a little bowl of sesame seeds. And look how pretty that finished product is. Just an awesome recipe. So this is where you can find our recipes. We have recipes in 2 formats. We have them in videos on Vimeo and on YouTube. You can check them out. So it's kind of a step-by-step. All the recipe videos are 3 to 4 minutes, no longer. And if you want to see a recipe in PDF format, we have a link to that as well. So give them a try. If you have any questions, you can contact us. And it was great talking to you today.
Great, thank you. So I just want to thank you.
Sorry, Rachel, I was going to
Sure.
send these links out afterwards too to everybody. So if you're participating and you can't access them right now, we will send them as the follow-up.
I was just going to say that. Yes, there was a question.
Sorry.
That somebody was asking about the video, the recipes, and I said it would be sent afterwards. Yeah, great. So thank you both for the presentation. I think it was really great, and we learned a great deal about the seafood, and all the tips and recipes are very helpful. It always makes me want to go make seafood and pick something out for dinner every time I talk about this subject. So